Alrighty, everyone. Glad to see everyone on the meeting. We are also live on YouTube. If you're joining us from there, welcome. So tonight is our October monthly program. It's only a few days out till Halloween. I hope everyone has some fun plans. And my favorite part of October is always decorating, but I'm pretty simple, so I got literally just a pumpkin on my desk, and that's about it. But as always, before we get started with our presenter for the day, we do have a few announcements. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oop. There we go. All righty. So first and foremost, we have a joint field trip with the Broward chapter on Saturday, October 30th. This field trip will be in the Concho Billy Trail in Big Cypress National Preserve and will run from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Following on Thursday, November 11th is Veterans Day, meaning that the Everglades National Park will have a free entrance. So it's a great opportunity to go see the wonderful natural splendor that is the Everglades, absolutely free of charge. On Tuesday, November 23rd, we have our next chapter program. The topic is still to be determined. We're not exactly sure what it's going to be yet, but we will have information for you on our chapter calendar, which is available on the Date FMPS website. And it will also be included in the upcoming November newsletter. In December, we have a chapter workday at the Ernest F. Coe Visitor Center in Everglades National Park. The date is still to be determined for that as well, but the workday will run from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. If you're a new volunteer, if you haven't volunteered in these workdays before and you're interested, please contact Patty Fairs. Her email is copied on this slide. There's just some preliminary paperwork that the National Park requires before you could join on as a volunteer. There's another volunteer opportunity. So Dade Chapter FMPS is having the occasional collaborative Pine Rockland restoration project with Fairchild's Connect to Protect. If you're interested in participating in those, you could send an email to Daniela Champney at connecttoprotect@fairchildgarden.org. So that's it for announcements. We do have a few new members joining our chapter. So please give a warm welcome to Misty Little, Diane and Brian Lockwood, Angel Lopez, John Meltzer, Tiffany Melvin, and Alex Seaschultz. Welcome to all of them. And if you are joining us and you are not currently a member, becoming a member is a great way to support the chapter and our mission to promote the preservation, conservation, and restoration of native plants and native plant communities of Florida. We have a lot of resources available for anyone in general to look through if they're interested in learning. We have several links in social media, which you can see on the right side of the slide, as well as a lot more information on our chapter website. And if you at any point have any questions regarding upcoming events or any resources you might be looking for, you can always reach out to us at datefmps@gmail.com. So that's it for today's announcements. So today's program is an interesting one. We're kind of deviating from the usual fare of plants and delving into a very interesting topic, which is bats. We have Jessica Anderson here today, so I'd like to take a quick moment to just introduce Jessica. So Jessica is an MS student at the University of West Georgia. She previously lived in Miami, where she had the opportunity to work in the Everglades on a sea turtle monitoring project and also in Biscayne National Park as a naturalist, where her love for the outdoors was restored. She hopes to pursue a PhD in the field of disease ecology. Jessica, a very warm welcome to you, and I think you are able to share your screen if you can, so take it away from here.
I'm not getting any audio. I don't know if anyone else is.
I'm not.
Is that better?
There we go.
Okay, you can hear.
Awesome.
Okay, cool. Let's see, share my screen. Share. And okay, can everyone see what's going on?
We sure can.
Okay, awesome. So the title of my project is Bats in an Anthropogenic World. I guess you all kind of have some conceptions about bats. Hopefully I will dispel any negative thoughts you may have about bats today. And I typically keep my programs fairly short just because I know people oftentimes have tons of questions. I know the last time I did a similar program to this, we went for about an hour and a half. So anytime you have questions, feel free to ask me. I love answering them. Dialogue is my favorite part of presenting and communicating with everyone. So just to get us started, I always like to start with just some general information about bats. Bats are the only mammalian species capable of true flight. They belong to the mammalian order Chiroptera, which translates to literally mean hand wing. So if you hold your hand up like this is pretty much the shape of a bat's wing. Its thumb is on the top. It's that little finger you often see right here in this picture. They're homologous structures. Their wings are just like our hands in that they have the same embryonic origins. So that's always kind of a fun thing to know. Bats are nocturnal. They only come out at night. However, it is possible that you may see them flying around sometimes during the day, often to, take a drink of water or go forage for some food or switch to roost. They also may just be hanging out in trees, which is totally normal. If you see them, kind of enjoy them at a distance. Don't really approach them. You never know. They may be a little upset, not know what's going on. So that brings me to another interesting point. There are no bats in the United States that drink blood. I know that's a common misconception a lot of people have that makes them nervous. For the most part, bats in North America are insectivorous, or there's some frugivores. Here in Florida, they're also all insectivorous. So you're pretty much safe. The only bats that are sangivorous are the vampire bats, and they're found in South America. So the reason those are interesting is that they don't also choose to attack humans. They typically go for cattle. So farmers have to be aware of that when they have their herd. They have to keep an eye on them because they have to be cold if the cattle does contract rabies. Here in North America, rabies really isn't a huge problem. Only about 6% of the specimens that are presented to the Centers for Disease Control actually tested positive for rabies. So pretty much everything other than that, the bat was just tired, a little emaciated, looked a little concerning, but they were fine. So in Florida, you guys have 13 native species of bats. So this slide shows some commonly found bats that you may see flying around at night. All of these bats, like I said, are insectivorous, and they use echolocation to find their prey, and they consume insects such as moths, beetles, mosquitoes, and even some flying ants. Bats become active about 15 to 30 minutes before sunset, and they stay active until approximately midnight. Some stay out a little later, but that's the majority of bats decide to go home after that. They spent the night doing what they need to do. Just to give you an idea of how many insects these bats can consume, one bat can consume up to 1,000 insects in 1 hour. If a mother is pregnant or lactating, she can consume up to 4,000 insects in one night. So it's estimated that bats consuming insects saves the agricultural industry anywhere between, I've heard low ball of 5 and a high ball of $13 billion per year on pesticide use. So if you're looking here, probably the most unique bat that you're going to see is this Mexican free-tailed bat. You see its tail membrane right here, and its tail actually extends beyond that membrane. That's a whole group of bats called the free-tailed bats. There's many of them. The bonneted bat that we'll get to, they are also free-tailed bats. But we have the Mexican free-tailed bat. We have the southeastern myotis. We have the evening bat, which is a very common coastal species that you'll see up the coast of Florida and on into Georgia, sometimes in Alabama. We also have a northern yellow bat, common misnomer, but it is in coastal regions, Seminole bats, and eastern red bats. So some less commonly found bats that you may not see in southern Florida include the tricolor bat, the gray bat, the big brown bat, the hoary bat, rafinesque, and the velvety free-tailed bat. So of these bats, you do have some endangered species. We have the bonneted bat, which I'll show on the next slide. And we also have the gray bat here that's listed as federally endangered. So I had some people request to hear a little more information about the Florida bonneted bat, which is a little out of my wheelhouse, but I did some research for you all. Hopefully you'll get some good information from this. So to reiterate, the Florida bonneted bat gained listing as a federally endangered species in 2013. This is the largest species of bat in Florida. It can reach a body length of about 6.5 inches and have a wingspan of almost 20 inches. So you guys, that's huge. That's really big for North America. That's almost a 2-foot wingspan. That's not something we commonly see here in North America. So these bats are not very well studied. They're pretty hard to find. They're pretty rare, and they have a limited range. So what we do know is that they produce 1 pup per season. This is a very low ratio for the size of this mammal. Mammals of this size are typically producing multiple litters per year of anywhere between 3 and 5, offspring per litter. They're kind of unique. Bats live for a long time. So in the wild, bats can typically live between 15. I think there's even been a documented case of a bat living to be 30 in the wild. So really long lived, but produce few offspring, hence the reason why their populations can be threatened by things like pathogens, habitat destruction, and climate change. So the bonneted bat prefers to live in semi-tropical forest. So these are characterized by tropical hardwoods, pine woods, and mangrove habitats. However, they will utilize urban settings and can be found in roosts such as bat boxes. They can be found in houses. I read where they've been found on golf courses, flying around, hanging out, eating bugs there. Light sources where insects gather. That's another common place that you can find them as well. So some direct threats to our bonneted bats are climate change. Hurricanes, as you know, are becoming a more increasingly common thing, and it's going to continue to increase in number as our climate begins to warm up. They're also threatened by habitat destruction. As you all know, Florida is becoming increasingly urbanized. As every day that passes, I swear I hear something new being built. I heard about the water park that they were trying to put on the some habitat that bonneted bats were known to live in. So that's an interesting thing. Not interesting, but very sad. And I think, fortunately, I didn't hear the end result of that, but the last I heard was that the Fish and Wildlife was trying to set aside 1.5 million acres of land that they were going to preserve. So somebody had to tell me if that actually happened or not. So some additional threats include logging and wood harvesting, human intrusion, pollution from the agricultural industry, and just other types of human invasion. So this is a website that I don't know if you've heard about. I learned about not too long ago. This is the IUCN's Red List. So IUCN stands for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. This is a group of scientists that comes together and they contribute to mapping globally the biodiversity of all species. So that includes mammals, plants, insects. I think they're even getting around to birds. So when scientists when they have the funding, they contribute to this knowledge base. So this is a really good place to look if you want to know about the listing status of a species. So you can see that this population as of 2015 is trending downward. They're decreasing. That has to do with only producing one pup per year, but living a long time. And as you can see, historically documented areas that bonneted bats have been found include Port Charlotte, near Naples, and Hollywood and Miami as well. So in doing some research, I found a pretty interesting article I can share with you if you send me an email at the end of this. It was titled "The Impact of Land Use and Climate Change on the Distribution of Endangered Florida Bonneted Bats" and was published in 2017. Some scientists at the University of Florida deployed acoustic detectors in a variety of habitats, and those were denoted by these black squares that you can see in the right map on the screen. The Florida bonneted bat is not very well studied, like I've mentioned. There's not a whole lot of data on lifespan, life history, habitat range. So these wonderful scientists decide that they want to further elucidate the extent of the range of this species and evaluate its relationship with different types of land cover, including developed areas, agricultural areas, wetlands, uplands, and even open water in 13 different counties in South Florida. So as you can see here with this image, they found that the range of bonneted bats is actually much larger than historically thought. They have suitable habitats in much more areas than just the ones we previously listed. So like Naples, Miami, Hollywood, those areas we see in the darker areas. There's more potential for these bats to be found. And in the blackened cells, that's where there were actual detections of bonneted bats. So you can see they're even a little farther north than previously thought. So some trends that were found during this study was that development did, in fact, negatively impact the occupancy of these bats. Originally, scientists in the 60s thought that these bats were okay with urban development because they were found in places with human occupancy. They were found on golf courses, things like that. So kind of negated what was historically thought. So further studies are needed to kind of explain this relationship. We kind of want to look and see if that's actually a standing fact or if it's just, some contraindications that happen with the data. So on the other hand, bonneted bats did prefer agricultural locations. The extended dry season in southern Florida can result in decreased insect abundance, but agricultural areas provide access to water and increased insect diversity, making these areas prime foraging habitats. Productivity in the animal kingdom is typically correlated with increased rainfall, and the preference for decreased rainfall during the spring has not been explored. They found that spring, for some reason, lower rainfall and higher occupancy of bats, kind of contraindicated what they found previously, and just more studies were needed. So there was a preference for warmer locations. This is kind of typical for bat species in general. They preferred temperatures of above 16 degrees Celsius. That made them more active. They found that they recorded them more often with their acoustic detectors, and that, just more prevalence. So the authors of the study go on to say that they want to do more research in northern locations, but they were happy to confirm that bonneted bats are more common than they previously thought. So they're doing better, just not perfect yet. So I also saw when I was looking at your all's Instagram page, it was kind of cool that you had some guest speakers come and talk to you about fire ecology and the importance of fire on the landscape. So I kind of just wanted to go back and touch on that because throughout my master's program, I found that fire is important. I didn't realize how significant it was. So fires in South Florida are very common. I've seen that you guys have been having a lot of fires being conducted in the Everglades, places like that, trying to cut back on leaf litter and kind of restore native habitats for these animals that were once kind of endangered. So like bats, red-cockaded woodpeckers, other things like that. So historically, these fires were more natural, and now they're having to be more man-made. And a thing that's really interested ecologists in general is what's more important, fire frequency or seasonality for bats and other animals in general. So for the bonneted bats specifically, both fire frequency and seasonality are important. The bonneted bats prefer dry seasons, burning during dry seasons, as well as having a 3 to 5 year interval between fires. So this gives them a little time for succession to take place. A different core group of insects are recruited during this time. And it seems that those are the ones the bonneted bats prefer to feed on. So this implies that they are adapted to fire. This is something that they need to manage their habitat. These fires create open pathways and snags that are used for roosting and increase insect abundance. So some fun things I found while going through the data that you all have in South Florida. There are many documented cases of accidental species ending up in Florida. So some of those are our adorable Cuban flower bat, the Jamaican fruit bat, the Buffy flower bat, and the Cuban pig-eating bat. So in case you don't know what accidental species are, those are just, it's defined as species that have appeared in a location temporarily, but are not native to this location. So they may have got misdirected on their migration paths. They may have been blown away, literally you get blown by the wind sometimes to different locations. All kinds of crazy things happen. But for whatever reason, they wound up here in South Florida. So there are typically only 1 to 2 documented instances for each of these bats. But I thought it was interesting because all of these species are frugivores, and they were found either in Miami or the Florida Keys, so nearby to all of you all. So accidental species, like I said, aren't native, but that doesn't make them any less interesting. It just means that you have no bats in Florida that are frugivores or nectivores natively. So that means that, the plants you plant are not being pollinated by these bats. Instead, they're being pollinated by the insects, and bats are coming in at that level. But I'll give you a little bit about the importance of bats as pollinators. They are the primary mammalian pollinator. Think more of bats in South America, Asia, places like that. So their flower preferences include flowers that open at night, flowers that are pale or white in color. This makes them easy to see in the darkness. They show up a little bit better. They also prefer a large bloom. This gives them a place to kind of sit while they're trying to drink nectar or eat pollen. They also prefer fragrant flowers. They smell these flowers and they can navigate toward them using scent in addition to their eyesight. And of course, they want nectar. They want a benefit that will, give them some advantage as well. Interesting enough, there are plants that are entirely dependent on the pollination by bats. And these plants, of course, are only applying to them in their native form, because when they're agriculturally used, they have artificial means to pollinate them. But some of those include mangoes, bananas, agave, guavas, cacao, and agave is a really interesting one. I know there's a lady at UGA who does an entire speech on the significance of tequila. If you enjoy tequila, you should definitely think of bat, because without bats, there would be no tequila. So then I'm going to transition over to more of what I do for my research, because that's what I'm a little better versed in. So a key word that goes around the bat community often, you may or may not have heard this, is white nose syndrome. So white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, big word that I'm probably just going to abbreviate to PD for the rest of this. So the name of this disease comes from this white growth that we see around typically the nose muzzle area of these bats that you can see right here in our tricolor and our little brown bat. But that's not the only place that we can see fungus growth. We can also see on the ears here. This is its little forearm and its finger also get that growth on those ears. And you can't see it here, but they also have growth on their tail membranes. So PD is very well adapted to growing in more cold and damp conditions. This makes it a perfect, a suitable fungus to grow in winter roosting locations. So when a bat becomes heavily infected with PD, its physiology becomes disrupted. So these bats become more active. The result of that is this fungus is actually digging in, for lack of a better word, the keratin of their cells, and it's actually utilizing the water in their cells, taking that up, which makes them dehydrated, making them active. They want to get up and arouse more often to go and drink water. And the more active you become during the winter, the more risk you run of depleting your winter fat stores, which are very important during this time because period of prey scarcity. So you don't have as much access to food during this time. And this can ultimately lead to starvation and dehydration. As we'll see, these bats can die, have mass mortality events, and population losses that are very significant. So here, have a map for you. Sorry if I was a little better with technology, I'd show you this graphic in motion, but this is of today locations in which PD can be found. So talk a little bit about its origins. It's originally thought to have come from Europe. When we look at isolates of this fungus in Europe, we find that they are genetically almost identical. The bats over there have this fungus growing in their environment. They have it on their bodies, and it causes no deaths to these. They're not injured by this disease. So what's thought is that this came on some contaminated gear, such as boots, caving equipment, other hiking gear. Somebody just put it in their bag without cleaning it and brought it to North America. And so you see this red X here in New York. That's the location of entry. So I don't know if you know, but there's Howell's Cave there. It's a very common tourist attraction. Millions of people go there every year. They want to see the bats. They want to see the cave. Beautiful location. So in a little bit of citizen science, scientists working on this case got people involved. What they noticed was around 2007, they started having bats dying in their caves. And it wasn't one or two. It was more like entire populations. They had losses of up to 99% in this cave. So they wanted to start pinpointing, what's happening, what's going on. So what they did was they recruited people who had been to the cave to look at historical pictures that had been dating. And what they found was that this entered in 2006, and since then has made its way up and down the East Coast, so all the way up into Canada, as far south into Georgia. Thankfully, you guys have no reported cases still, but that's potentially likely to change. We're not yet sure if it could. It has moved as far west as Montana. It's in Colorado. I'm not sure. I guess this is a little older map. It's even jumped on, it's thought that another contaminated person took a plane to Washington, and it is now there as well and spreading along the West Coast. So this disease is very well studied in northern locations. Like I said, it arrived in 2006 in New York. So at northern latitudes, scientists have had a lot more experience than we have in Georgia. At more southern latitudes, it didn't reach us until 2013, 2014 time range. So there's still a lot of questions as to, how does it react in our area? How are bats impacted? We're not seeing the same kind of mortality rates. And so that's a a big area of study for us right now. Just to give you one more statistic, 13 of the 47 native bats in North America can become infected with this disease. 3 of those species are hit the hardest are the little brown bats, which were once one of the most common bat species in North America. You don't really see them anymore. There's a good chance nobody except for really experienced bat biologists will ever see those bats again. Also, the northern long-eared bat is another one, and tricolored bats, which are native to Florida and Georgia, and they're what I study. So tricolored bats, their scientific name is Perimyotis subflavus, happens to be my favorite bat, I guess by default. So Perimyotis subflavus roughly translates to mean yellow bat, similar to Myotis. Myotis is a pretty typical genus, not as much so in Florida, but more so in the rest of North America. And the yellow refers to its hair color. Also, the colloquial name tricolor gets its name from the 3 colors that are on its fur. So at the tip of the fur, there is brown, yellow is toward the middle, and the base is a dark color, usually dark brown to black. So these bats are very small. We just talked about the largest bat in Florida. Now we're going to talk about the smallest bat in Florida. These guys weigh between 4 and 8 grams throughout the year, minus the winter season. So think in terms of paper clips. If you get a chance, go grab 4 or 8 paper clips. And that's about how much these bats weigh. They're super tiny, mildly terrifying to hold one of them because you feel like you're going to snap them in half. But these bats are really cool. They can live up to 15 years in the wild. Another fairly well documented, not the best documented cases, but 15 years. They produce 1 to 2 pups on average per year. They are listed by the IUCN as a vulnerable species. They're currently up for listing as federally endangered in the United States. They were turned down in 2017. The reason for that is white nose syndrome had not spread as far and wide as it has today. So they should be up for relisting again in another 2 years. So like I said, they are heavily impacted by white nose syndrome. These populations have experienced up to 75% losses in some areas. Again, that's more northern latitudes where it has been better documented. Just to reiterate, they are insectivorous species. They feed on beetles, moths, and ants. Typically flying ants is what we've seen. They were also another species that was very common. You still see them pretty much all the time in Florida. They're not hard to find, but they are along the eastern coast of North America, and their range expands out to Colorado and Texas. And oddly enough, they found some colonizing in Washington not that long ago. So before we dive into my projects that I'm working on, going to give you just a little more bat roosting information. The winter season runs from late October to mid-April, and that's the season that I'm most concerned with my study. During this time, bats go into a period of torpor, which is similar to hibernation. For those of you who know about that, their body temperature drops to about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above ambient temperature. So during this time, their metabolism is suppressed. That helps them conserve energy during prey scarcity. In addition, their immune system is suppressed. So this opens them up to be more vulnerable to diseases and other pathogens that they may encounter passively while going into torpor. So like I mentioned, bats do arouse to forage, drink water, and switch roost during this time. So they can be inactive from anywhere between they're typically inactive in Georgia about 5 to 7 days. In colder parts in like Canada, they can be inactive for as long as 2 weeks before they decide to move around and become active. Typical types of winter roosts include caves, mines, culverts, bridges, and tunnels. Of course, there are other types of roosts that they can utilize. These are just the more common ones. And like I previously mentioned, bat roosts are environmental roosts for PD. They prefer these cool, humid temperatures that can last them year round. So if you go into a cave in the summer, it's going to feel pretty much the same as it's going to feel during the winter. So there's never really a good time for this fungus to die. So one thing I didn't mention, going back to that, in case you're wondering about temperature ranges, PD can survive at temperatures from about 40 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 5 to 10 degrees, 5 to 20 degrees Celsius. So it can get pretty warm in a site and it still will not die. And there's even been more recent studies showing that it may be able to live or survive up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So as you can see here on this list, I work with a lot of different people. This is a huge project. I think the grant was for almost $350,000. Pretty big grant in terms of small town colleges. So we have West Georgia, Kennesaw State University, the Forest Service, Florida Fish and Wildlife, Georgia DNR, University of Georgia, and Alabama, essentially Fish and Wildlife, who are contributing to this project. So we are hoping to gain further understanding of how winter activity of tricolor bats differ between traditional and non-traditional sites. Traditional sites include caves, mines, and tunnels. Some examples of non-traditional roosts include culverts and bridges. We also want to determine if winter activity of tricolor bats in non-traditional hibernacula in southeastern United States influences white nose syndrome susceptibility. So many of the site locations within the study are positive for the fungus that causes white nose syndrome. However, the majority of bats at these sites do not exhibit signs or symptoms of this disease. So in terms of my study, my sites, I have never seen any bats with white nose syndrome. That's more of, I think when you start getting into Tennessee is more in North Carolina, you'll start actually seeing bats infected with the fungus. Some Texas A&M researchers found that external temperatures drive activity within roosts, meaning that there will be more winter activity if external air temperatures are high compared to relative temperatures expected for that region. Temperatures in temperate regions stay fairly moderate throughout the season, and it's thought that this could contribute to increased activity at southeastern sites, resulting in a decreased prevalence of PD, which is a cold-loving fungus that thrives, like I said, from 41 to 50 degrees and can survive up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. In addition, we want to compare the fungal burden between sites. A few studies have investigated winter temperatures at non-traditional sites throughout the winter season. However, it's thought that culverts and bridges will have more variable temperature ranges compared to traditional sites as a result of increased exposure to external temperatures and can be influenced by different materials used to construct these things. So, we have metal bridges, concrete bridges, culverts can have all kinds of different materials in them as well. They can be 3 boxes wide, 1 box wide. They can be varying in length, all kinds of variables at play when we start looking at these non-traditional sites. And finally, we want to better understand if and how tricolor bats go between sites. So it is common for bats to switch roost between these activities, and we just want to know how far these bats actually travel between to find suitable conditions. Like I said, tricolor bats aren't very well studied, so there's some people who think that they may potentially migrate between different states, and we're just trying to look at that and see if we can find any evidence of such. Okay, so in addition, my professor's working me extra hard. I have to design an extra study on my own. And so the title of that is The Effect of White Nose Syndrome and on hibernacula conditions on the skin microbiota of endangered bats. So I just want to evaluate how the microbiota of tricolor bats varies between different roosting sites. Just in case you don't have the same kind of immunology background, I had to gain that as well myself. The skin serves as an extension of the immune system and is inhabited by microorganisms such as archaea, bacteria, microbial fungi, and viruses that do not cause disease in the host. So these are often referred to as commensal microorganisms. You may hear about that when you read about gut microbiome studies and things like that. So collectively, these microbes constitute the microbiota. The microbiota is influenced by host-related factors as well as geography and environmental factors. So some examples of host-related factors include age of the organism and different life history. So where does it live? How does it travel? What is its diet? Things like that. Geography and environmental factors include things like latitude, terrain of the habitat, temperature and humidity, and how those things change throughout the year. So the primary objective of this study is to compare the skin microbiota of tricolor bats between sites that are both PD positive and PD negative throughout the Southeast. There's no good baseline of that. There's only been one study that's kind of been similar to this, and they only looked at a handful of tricolor bats. They didn't really focus on any species in particular, and it's kind of vague. So wanted to expand on that, give a foundation. Even though we're already kind of missing a few pieces of the puzzle, this can be of historical value. So the hope is to provide a better understanding about the potential defensive role of the microbiota against white nose syndrome. We made 3 hypotheses to drive the study. So 1, we predict the microbial diversity of PD positive sites will differ from that of PD negative sites. That's just because we do expect to find some difference. We don't expect them to be the same throughout. We also predict that PD positive sites will have lower microbial diversity compared to that of PD negative sites. And this is simply resource competition, right? So only so many microbes can inhabit the surface of a wing or a muzzle. And if they're positive for PD, that implies that the PD is outcompeting other bacterial and fungal species that may have been there prior to that. So it's been found that at northern latitudes, the evenness and diversity of the microbiota of bats decreases post-exposure to PD. However, sites positive for PD at these same latitudes have been shown to have bacteria that actually show antifungal effects in lab-based settings. So we're talking, I don't know how well versed you may or may not be with microbes, but we're talking things like Pseudomonas, similar related to Pseudomonas aeruginosa, if you've ever heard of that disease. And we're thinking of Rhodococcus, so just different types of bacteria that we're expecting to see that could influence the presence or lack of PD on bats. So we expect to see species that have antifungal properties at our PD positive sites at our southern locations as well. So I think there'll be some overlap we're waiting to see. And finally, we predict that environmental factors will drive microbial diversity. We expect to see microbial differences between our sites as a result of being located in different ecoregions. So some of you may remember me and my husband. My husband also decided to go back to school. Sam's doing Geographic Information Systems, GIS. So he was kind enough to create this lovely map for me and my study. So when you're looking at this map, you can see the different ecoregions of both Georgia and Alabama, and you can also see my 5 sites. So we have Buck Creek, Weaver Cave, and Talladega Culvert. Those are all, despite this orange, they are technically all right here in this green. And this area, for simplification purposes, is called the Piedmont region. We also have a site here called Bullock County Culvert. It's more near a fall line. So that's actually an ecoregion. It's like a transition zone going between the Piedmont and the coastal plains. So here We also have brine culvert, and this is also coastal, or this is coastal plain right here, and this is still that transition from fall line. There's obvious, it's a gradient, it's not black and white like I just made it sound, but for simplification purposes, this is the coastal plain. So we wanted to have a variety of sites that we looked at. So this site is positive, this site's positive, unknown, because it has not been very well studied. Like I said, we have a ton of sites where bats are found, and we just need people to study them. Bats aren't very popular in the animal realm. If you can imagine, people want to go for the more glamorous animals. So skunk, deer, more common things, but bats are increasing in popularity, and we're getting around to that. And Brian Culvert here, it's a negative site because we're getting farther south. So these are some pictures just to give you an idea of the conditions in which I go into. This right here is Buck Creek Culvert. We have 1, 2, 3 boxes. Like I was telling you, they do vary. This is a relatively short culvert. It's only about 150 meters long. You can see to the end of them. So we have water. Bats always prefer some water. I think I forgot to mention that. If you want to make your house more suitable for bats, give them water. They'll come. They like it. So we have water here that's about ankle deep. This was when first found, it was being used, or it's still being used as a summer maternity colony roost. So what happens is we have bats who come in here, and there will be thousands during the summer. So many bats that you get mildly terrified to go anywhere near this location because they're screaming at you. They're everywhere. The walls turn black because there's so many bats. You just can't see through anymore. It's a gold mine, and we're not really sure why it's a gold mine here, because these conditions aren't good. Right here above, there's Interstate 20, which is a highly traveled interstate, tons of noise. It's so loud you can hardly hear to talk to the person beside you. Lights coming in, temperatures fluctuate, but again, we're monitoring that to see what's going on. In contrast, we have this beautiful cave right here, Weaver Cave. Formerly open to the public as a site that you could go in. It was desecrated to the point of no return, covered in graffiti. I won't even show you because it's not appropriate, and it's very ugly on the inside. Cannot be fixed at this point. But what we are doing is we had the Georgia Alabama Land Trust purchase this parcel of land, and thus acquiring the cave. They have worked to put gates on these areas. There's 4 main entrances, and they've now closed off 3 of the 4. So people are no longer able to go in without granted permission. And here on this side, we have Bryan County Culvert. It's a doozy. Those boxes are only 4 foot tall, and the water is 2.5 feet deep all the way through. It's actually a 6-box culvert. So we have the 3 right here. There's about a 200-meter gap, and another 3 boxes, very similar to this, very similar in water depth and height. As you can see down at the bottom left, that is an example of a pipe that you find in these things. That pipe is about 2 foot tall, and bats love it. There's these wheat poles in there. So those are basically holes that have been drilled up into the culvert for structural purposes. And some of these culverts have been refitted to make sites more suitable for bats. That was a big initiative that was pushed by some guys in Texas. You may have heard of him, Merlin Tuttle. He's done many interviews. He's basically the king of bats, the living king of bats. And he made a big push to have a paper put out. It was called Bats and Bridges. He also put out some work on culverts, and like I said, teaching people how to re-outfit these structures to make them more habitable for bats. And here on the bottom right, we have a picture of myself and another teammate, my professor. Actually, I made him go with me into Weaver Cave. So just to kind of show you some of the nicer parts of it. You still see that graffiti, but yeah, so these are places bats love to hang out and look in. So a common question I've been getting lately is bats and COVID. What's the deal? What's going on? So can bats get COVID-19? As far as I know, there are no documented cases of a human transmitting COVID-19 to bats. So we are unsure, but the answer is it's very likely. Bats, as you may or may not know, often have multiple disease, or they're diseases to us, not diseases to them. It's pretty common for them. Rabies doesn't impact them the way it does us. Other bats, such as in Africa, can carry things like Ebola, Marburg, other things like that, causes them no harm, causes us tons of harm. That's another reason we always advise people to keep their distance from bats. You never know, and it's rather to be safe, and you don't want to now give them anything that we could have. So yeah, that human bat interface poses a threat for a spillover event, which would be a nightmare. We do not want North American bats to contract COVID-19 because then we have an increased risk of this virus mutating in not only humans, but also bats. And then we have this passage going back and forth, and they could become potentially a reservoir for this disease, meaning that we would live with it for the rest of our lives, which I guess we may already do that, but in a more positive light. So there are a lot more precautions being placed on us now when we go to the field to handle bats. There were already quite a few, but we want to make sure we're extra careful. In Georgia, we are required to wear KN95 mask. And in Alabama, we are required to wear N95 mask. We had to get fit tested, make sure everything was perfect so that we're not transmitting anything at any time. We're all vaccinated. We have to get COVID tested each time we go out. It's a big ordeal. So they also up the requirements for protective gear. We have to wear gloves at all times. And it's important that we minimize personnel at these sites. So these are just some fun pictures where people are actually wearing masks and doing the right thing. Some of us hunched over in a little pipe trying to get bats. You can see here that dark circle at the top of the middle picture is a wheat pole. That's actually being studied right now by some students out at Texas A&M. Just a fun little tidbit about tricolor bats. They typically roost individually, whereas many bat species are very gregarious. They roost in groups. You'll never find one or two by themselves. It'll always be like 3 or more. However, tricolor bats are starting to deviate from their typical behavior. In these wheat poles, when you look in them, sometimes you'll see 5 to 8 tricolor bats all hunched together, and we're not sure why. So more evidence of things are changing, and we need to study and figure out what's going on. In the picture, the far right in my lap in that picture is a picture of our acoustic detectors. We use the models, the Anthropogenic Express. So what we do is we put 2 of those at each entrances of culverts. At the cave site, we pick 2 highly trafficked by bats entrances and put them out there. And those devices are calibrated to about 42 megahertz. And that's the frequency at which bats emit sound. So looking for that using those detectors. And so, like I said, I typically keep these things short because I know people typically have tons of questions about bats. They want to ask me things. Sometimes I fumble, obviously, and forget to mention certain things because I'm a nervous speaker. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I am always available. May be busy, may take me a few days, but I'm always happy to get back to you. And if you need any citations, that you want to see any of the papers that I read, or hopefully I'm writing in the future, send me an email and I will make sure to make those available to you. And that does it for my part of the presentation. I'm excited to have some questions, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And we do have a couple of questions already on chat. Are you able to view chat?
Yes, let me pull that up.
So we have the first one from Josie Galvin.
Okay. Okay, so the question is, how can you protect bats in Florida? I'll tackle that part first. Okay. Personally, in your own yard, like I said, fumbled a little, forgot to mention this with the plants because I know somebody asked me to mention more about plants. And since we have insectivorous bats, there's limited studies on that, but I'll tell you what I did know. They love native plants because native plants attract native pollinators, right? So they want to eat these moths, they want these beetles. So making those plants available to them, maybe planting some plants that bloom at night. I was trying to look up a few species of night blooming plants in Florida. I was having a little difficult time because I couldn't tell what was native and what was cultivated. But yeah, anything that blooms at night, anything that's white, those are all very beneficial. If you have trees in your yard that are maybe not in the best condition and you're thinking about cutting them down, but you cannot cut them down because it's still safe for that tree to be there, leave it. Bats really do love what we call snags. So snags are these rotting trees. They'll often roost in the cavities of those trees. Let's see, what else? Water sources. Bats love to go drink out of your pool. They do it at our pool all the time. They'll drink out of a bird bath. Any water source that they can get. Those are all very beneficial things. I know people often like to install bat boxes too. I highly recommend that you buy those instead of build them. Bats are very finicky about the specifications they need. I'm not very well versed in that. I've tried. But if you do install one of those, make sure you paint it black. They like for those boxes to get super hot. They want it to be super warm. So that is one thing you can, or a few things you can do. And how do we monitor without risking exposing our nocturnal friends? So again, this is where those acoustic monitors come in. We install those and they are a passive monitoring system. So what we do is we will strap those to trees at entrances. We'll turn those on. We'll calibrate them to the frequency at which you can detect each specific bat species. I know it varies from species to species. I don't know the gray bats, but yeah, you install those. Those devices are kind of expensive. So that's usually a DNR thing or a forestry service thing where they get those. But you can do that. They also have internal passive loggers. So what you would do is go into a site and you could set those up, and the batteries only need to be changed depending on the quality of your battery. There's some that can last for 2 to 3 months, or if you use plain old alkaline, you can usually get about a month and a half out of those. But what I would say the most important thing is to make sure you don't risk bringing any harm to them is make sure you sanitize your gear. So anytime you go into these sites, there's a whole page on whitenosesyndrome.org. They are actually kind of leading the charge in terms of putting out information on how you should decontaminate your gear, how this disease is spreading. All basic information that you want to know can be found there. So to clean your gear, anything that can be wiped down, so like surfaces, flashlights, headlamps, things like that, you can spray it with high-grade alcohol, or you can use ethanol, high-grade ethanol. Both of those are perfectly fine, and the list goes on, but that's what I prefer to use because they are the easiest methods of sanitization for that. But other than that, just mainly keeping your distance as much as possible, giving them their space, and providing them with good habitat. That's also very important. Okay, so my next question is, with such high mortality, is there any sign that resistance is emerging for white nose disease? So yes, those little brown bats that I mentioned, they're the ones with 99% population loss in more of our northern latitudes. A gal I follow in Canada, we do a lot of interacting. She has done a few studies and found that those populations with 99% losses, that 1% that survived, those actually were fatter bats, oddly enough. If you were a fatter bat, you have a better chance of surviving just because you have more energy to pull from throughout the year or throughout the winter season, therefore making you more likely to survive this. And those bats are showing some signs of resistance. Again, this has more to do, they think, they're not sure. That's also the problem, is that those populations are slowly rebounding. So we're slowly being able to look at them in more detail. I've not seen any papers with genetic defenses. There's thought that fat cell receptors, something about the fat cells, could influence resistance as well. But yeah, some of those populations are rebounding, and unfortunately, we have lost, I think it's about 7 million bats at this point to this disease, so it's pretty significant. Next question. Oh, fun question. When will the results of your research be available? Well, hopefully I will. The goal is to publish, since it is such a large study with a lot of different organizations working with this. It could take a little longer. My specific project has to be out the door by next fall. We have set a deadline for me, and we're going to make that happen. Unfortunately, my first round of samples, we had to throw those out. They were not stored correctly, and I'm very specific on quality control because what I do is a very expensive process. Go into a little more detail about that. To take my samples, I actually have to use swabs, and I do DNA extractions from those swabs. So if they're not stored properly, they can become contaminated by whatever is surrounding them. So bacteria in your refrigerator. These particular samples were stored with other fungi samples, so I was a little unsure about them. And each sample cost me about $50 to do. And I right now have about almost 10,000 in funding to do my project. So I'm very particular. So we're going to try again this year. So like I said, I'm going to put what I have out in the fall of, wow, that's weird to say, 2022. And hopefully we'll get that paper published as soon as possible. But I can definitely stay in contact and make sure that you all get that if you're interested. So do we have data on the temperature range of the roosting locations preferred by different species? That depends on the species that you're interested in. So like I said, bats aren't typically a clamor species. They are not very well studied for compared to other mammalian species. So for tricolored bats, it varies. And this is the species I know about. That's why I feel comfortable with speaking about that. Since they are found at different latitudes, I've read in northern locations, they can prefer colder temperatures. So more in that 5 to 10 degrees Celsius range. And here in Georgia, they can be more accepting of warmer temperatures. So tricolor bats are kind of an anomaly. They're very adaptable. They're described as generalists in many aspects just because they will roost pretty much anywhere. You may find them in your house, caves, culverts, mines, tunnels. They have even found them in parts of savanna roosting in lichen in trees. So you just never know. It really depends. So sorry for the kind of vague answer, but I hope that kind of helps. Yeah, if you have a specific bat that you're interested in, shoot me a message and I'll definitely look into it for you and send you some research back. What has been the most surprising fact you discovered about bats since studying them? That's a good question. Just to give you even a little more information about my background, I was not an animal person in terms of my undergraduate. I did exclusively microbiology. So everything I've done so far has basically been brand new to me. Most surprising fact. I may have to think about that and come back to that. It's been very surprising that in order to identify many species, scientists look at toe hairs and shapes of ear traguses. Those are very distinguishing features on bats that can help you distinguish different Myotis species, which are notorious for all looking the exact same when they're in the field. They look different in pictures, but when you're out there, I swear you can't tell them apart. So maybe that would be one of the most surprising things.
We have James with his hand raised, so go ahead, James.
Yeah, I didn't know we had 13 different types of bats in Florida, but we don't have many caves, tunnels, or mines. And so you seem to indicate that they mostly hang out in trees. I guess we have culverts, but they're in the trees. But I just trying to think about a life cycle of a bat that lives in a tree. I mean, having babies in a tree, does the mother usually stay with the baby and not fly away, or doesn't have to? I mean, obviously it's a mammal, so it's breastfeeds. So just the life cycle, and I don't picture flocks of bats in trees. They don't roost like birds, do they? Are they all grouped together in a bunch of trees? Anyway, if you could tell me a little bit more about the kind of bats that we have in Florida, especially on the peninsula.
Of course. So a lot of the things that you don't think happen, they do happen. Uh, so bats, we'll go with pups because pups are fun to talk about, right? They're ugly, but they're cute. Uh, so a mother will give birth to her pups typically in the spring. She will carry them on the underside of her belly. So she will literally tuck them with her belly, tuck her tail up over them, and she will fly with them attached to her. If I'm remembering correctly, they stay with her for about 4 to 6 weeks before they are able to fly. Like you said, they do nurse with her, things like that. The Florida DNR that I work with is more kind of in the northern parts, but I know they have a cave that they're looking at. They obviously, like you said, they have culverts, and they have a mine, I think, as well that they're studying. So those things, they're not as prevalent as you think, but there's still enough habitats that they are. Bridges would be another common thing that you could look at as well. But like for white nose syndrome, it's not a big issue for you all. So it's not something they're investigating as much. However, to go to your tree comment, I was actually talking to a colleague the other day who informed me that one day he was sitting at a tree and he said, I know the bats are in this tree. I'm going to sit and watch this tree. And he sat and he said, it was like going to the Constitution. What is the bridge in Austin? Constitution Avenue, and watching the bats fly out, because he said they came out in a drove and there was just a ton of them and they darkened the night sky. And I was so impressed that they really will do that. It's not as common. You usually only get 1 or 2 in a tree, something like that. A bat you don't have in Florida, but we have in Georgia. Also, they roost in leaf litter. I don't know if any of the bats specific to Florida will do that. I would have to look. Bats are everywhere. Bats are common in Florida, hanging out in houses, right? They like those terracotta roofs, so they'll get in those tiles and they'll actually hang out in there as well. So for a little more of life cycle, give you some of that. So bats, they're weird. Bats copulate in the fall. So they do all that, have all their fun, and they actually will store sperm. The mothers will store sperm throughout winter. It's not very common for them to copulate in the winter. I do have a picture of that. Couldn't believe it. Took a picture, and it's become a big deal among my friends. But so they store that sperm. And then when we come out into winter, spring, we get mothers who become pregnant. That's when they become inseminated. They stay pregnant for, I think it's about a month or 2, and then they give birth to those live pups. They hang on to them through spring and summer. By the end of summer, these guys are first of the year. They're ready to fly off on their own after about 4 or 6 weeks. And again, this is for tricolor bats. All of this is very dependent upon each individual species. Then they fly off and they go live their little lives. And oftentimes we never hear from them again. But yeah, they're pretty simple. It's pretty much what you think with a mammal. They do hang out with mom for a little bit before leaving. And once they're able to figure it out, they go and doing their own thing. Some bats they come back to their home range, and they're very, I cannot think of the word right now, but they are very site fidelity. That's what it is. They experience site fidelity. So they will come back to their site at which they were birthed, stay there. They roost with their mothers. Mothers are also very interesting. While they have these pups, they will form, I know I briefly mentioned it, maternity colonies. So this is where they will actually group together and they will roost together. And this is in order to help them save energy, because by being together, you stay warmer and you're not having to shiver or do things like that. You can have care from multiple mothers to all these different pups. They're not always, you're my pup exclusively. Sometimes they share duties. However, a mother bat is able to locate her individual pup just like a human would be able to. They recognize their call specifically and they can find them. So I hope that answers your question, kind of. Awesome.
I think we got a couple more questions added to chat. First one from Gwen.
So bats can't per se grab things in their hand. However, I have seen them crawl up the side of a culvert, so a straight wall. They will crawl up it. They will crawl on ceilings. I have even seen them use their hands to swim. Unfortunately, we accidentally bumped a bat when grabbing it, and she kind of got angry, flew out of her hands, hit the water, and she swam until we picked her up. So they are capable of doing some things, but not necessarily holding on to anything. So that's kind of the difference between homologous and analogous structure, is that they're similar in origin, whereas analogous is they're similar in function. So they are not analogous, but they are homologous. So also, I hope that answers that. So what is bat fur similar to? The one you say looks quite soft. They are very soft. They, I akin them to holding a very fluffy chicken nugget. That is a very accurate representation. So yeah, they're very soft. If you're wondering what it's like to get bit by a bat, big brown bats pack a wallop. They are not, you don't have them in Florida. They're fair size. They get to be about 16 grams. They feel about like a cat bite, pretty solid bite there. But tricolor bats, which I study, they're so tiny that when they try to bite you, their mouth can't actually close on your finger. So I don't know how people actually get bit by them. I've still been trying to figure that out, because I've been bit by them many times and have never had anyone break skin. I've never had to get seen, and I've been fine. But I'm also rabies vaccinated, but it's kind of interesting.
I also have a question going back to, what can we do to help bats? So to what extent does light and noise pollution, particularly at night, affect them, and how can those things be mitigated?
Okay, so that is a big thing. They're more interested in Europe than we are here in the United States for some reason. Let me see. That's kind of so in Europe, they're more interested in, we'll tackle light pollution. So as you know, the street lights here put out so much light. It's basically daytime underneath them. And what happens is bats either love it or they hate it. So there's different species of bats. Some bats are forest exclusive. They don't want to come to urban settings. They're going to stay on the fringes. So if there's light, they're going to avoid it. And basically their habitat's going to be encroached on. It's going to shrink. That connectivity between sites is going to diminish. However, you have species like I was mentioning, the big brown bat. That's an easy one to mention because, except in Florida, apparently, they're pretty common, and they're very urbanized. So these bats really thrive in cities where there's tons of lights. Their wings are structured so that they can fly near these lights successfully, and they'll actually catch bugs all night at this light. And it kind of creates this poor tunneling effect for these insects because they get drawn in thinking it's the moon, but the big brown bats are really successful with them. So it helps and it hurts. In Europe, they've designed special lights. So they use different types of bulbs. They actually evaluated the difference between using, I'm not a light bulb expert, but like halogens, LEDs, all the different types. And they have specifically picked, I think it was an LED light in a specific wavelength that they use. They very much target it. And they also have worked on directing the lights to face at a specific angle so that it minimizes the kind of the scattering effect that the light has on the surrounding areas. Here in North America, people don't seem to be as interested in that. It's more of a Europe. I think there was another study in Australia they were doing similar things. For noise, that's always a huge issue for bats. You know, they want to have their quiet time, as we all do. Yeah, disruptance of habitat, especially by humans, is a big thing that can lead to death. It actually was one of the leading causes of death prior to white nose syndrome. So, you know, the more you wake them up, the more energy they have to use because their body is having to come back up to temperature. It's having to reactivate that metabolism, reactivate that immune system. And so they're using way too much energy and they're like, whoa, this is not good for me. So they are going to, well, you would think they're going to seek out quieter spots. And then you see culverts and it throws everything you've learned right out the door. Because like I was saying, most of those culverts have interstates, the ones that I go to at least, have interstates running right on top of them. So you have species that defy everything. From what I've learned so far is that there will always be species who are okay with noise, pollution, sound, what have you. And then there's always going to be the species who just can't tolerate it. And they're like, I'm done. I'm out. This is too much.
All right. Thank you.
Of course.
Does anyone else have any last minute questions for Jessica before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I've used a lot of the echo meter touch to just kind of find, you know, bats and stuff. I've been interested in that for a while. So if anyone was curious about, like, you know, what kind of bats I've documented here, and other people too, because I've seen other people here using iNaturalist and documenting the different bat species that we have. There are people that have set up mist nets, obviously with, you know, the right permitting to do studies. But this would be a link that people can check out. And I also had a question for you, Jessica, because not that long ago, there was a bonneted bat that was at Larry and Penny Thompson Park, which has pineland. And that's, like, you know, known for being one of the habitats that they use the most, or where they can roost in those old pines. And so I went with my cousin who had told me about it. I can't remember how she heard about it, but I took a picture of this bat, of a bonneted bat. So I don't know if you can click on the last link that I sent and look at it, because I was looking at the picture and I never thought of it at the time, but it kind of looks like it has, I mean, I'm not trying to, I hope it's not the white nose thing, but if you look at the picture of it and you zoom in on the nose, which is kind of like the thing that's most in focus in the picture, it kind of looks like it has something white on its nose. So I don't know if you can open up that picture and see it and zoom in on it. But, you know, that bat was just roosting in one of these little, you know, kind of huts that they have for people that want to have like a picnic or maybe like a small party or something like that. And so I was pretty close to the bat, and yeah, you can see the I don't know. I don't know if you would be able to recognize. What do you think?
So I had a similar thing happening at one of my culverts. I was convinced that this was white nose syndrome, that, oh my gosh, this is so big.
Yeah.
And it turns out it was condensation. So,
Okay.
so, I mean, I'm not saying that's what it is. You know, I don't have any experience actually identifying white nose syndrome growth in the wild. But based on, you know, what you've shown me and what I've seen in my own professional experience, it does look like there's just a little bit of condensation going on. It could also be dust. There's little guys getting all kinds of stuff.
That makes sense too.
Okay,
but
it's worth it to keep the photo. You never know. But as far south as you guys are, and I know it's as hot as you guys stay down there, it's probably fortunately not white nose syndrome.
That's true. That makes sense for the temperature. Forgot about thank goodness for the Miami, the heat that we have down here to prevent
right?
that. Yeah.
I mean, what is it in Miami today? What's the temperature?
I don't know, must have been in the 80s.
Yeah, we're finally in the 80s. It's gonna get to like 70s, then mid 60s, and that's as cold as it's probably gonna get.
I just need y'all to know I miss that with all my heart. Every day, all day, I miss that.
It is nice.
Yeah.
And for anyone also interested in a bit more on the light pollution, so Alexa put in chat, you can shield an outdoor light with a fixture or use a low energy color like red, or ideally use a motion trigger if you want to reduce light impact. And she recommends to see the International Dark Sky Association's recommendations. Thank you, Alexa. And Joy Klein saying 81 right now, so it's not too bad. Temperature wise here in Miami. Any more last minute questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have any more. All right, that seems to just about do it for tonight. Jessica, thank you so much for hopping on tonight's meeting. Speaking personally, the last time, and I think the only time I saw a bat in Miami was, funny enough, on Halloween in 2018. It was at a haunted house, like fair type of thing. So I'm holding out hope for this Halloween too, that I get lucky a second time.
That's so exciting.
But thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone for joining our program tonight. I hope that everyone has a great night.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one. Take care, and thanks again.
Y'all too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.